Kate Colejo and Arlene Aranda. Wow. I am so glad that we made time to share some been there, done that stories about leading organizations through AI transformations. This will be fun because there's what, 75, maybe 80 years between the three of us of experience leading organizations through large scale change transformations. And now we're leading organizations in the change arena through AI transformations. And I thought, we've known each other for what, 15 or so, maybe even longer
A
years,
long
paths
time.
have crossed. Yeah. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to just sit back and kick it, right? And just talk about, do we see any changes in the way that we lead organizations through AI transformations versus the way we lead them through traditional large transformations? So I think this will be fun. What do you think?
I think that'll be great. Thank you so much for having me, Eric. I know we have known each other for a long time, and serendipitously, Kate and I knew each other in a different space at a different time. So when you asked, and then you mentioned Kate, I was like, "Whoa, big circles, small circles." So I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric, for having us. And Arlene, it's super fun. Like, this is great to catch up. So let's get into it.
Cool. So I'm going to throw out a word and let's go around and just share what our initial thought is when you hear the word, and then we'll circle back and unpack it. What are your first thoughts around adoption in an AI transformation?
I'll go. I think behavior change, right? Is right now we're in this world. It's not as much about adoption anymore, but is AI becoming part of how people think, how they decide, how they work together and redesign their work? So, yes, adoption's still an important signal, but the bigger question is how are they changing their behaviors, their mindsets, and their beliefs?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is more of a phrase than a word. So, um, more complex than complex. I think as practitioners, we are pretty practiced in dealing with everything from human behavior to actually process to all of these different factors in any transformation. But I think AI um, it being really kind of hot and sexy right now and it moving so fast. There are some things that we're learning as we go along, which adds a layer of complexity to really kind of some of the way that we're trying to do change.
It makes a lot of sense. For me, the first thing that came to mind was maybe not so much of a constraint, right? Adoption. What I mean by that, I think there are, for me, two sides to adoption. I'm thinking about employee readiness, and then I'm thinking about leadership alignment. And from the employee readiness perspective, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I haven't seen a technological transformation where people were learning about the core capabilities at home, right? I learned how to prompt by going to, trying to find a vacation. Yeah, but no, but seriously, there's a McKinsey study, and I'll put a link to it, but back in 2025, and it said that employees were three times more likely to be using Gen AI for 30% of their daily tasks than their leaders expected. I thought, wow, for the leaders not to recognize that people are using it that much. And then the survey went on to say that 48% of employees rank training as the most important factor in Gen AI adoption. So to me, it says that people are trying to go fast, right? They want that. And I think from the leadership alignment perspective, I've seen AI implementations slow down a little bit because leaders weren't aligned on their priorities or how they wanted to approach it, which I think is fair, right? It's the kind of the total cost of this and the rate of return is still unknown yet. So they're going to be a little more cautious. Needed to get the governance stuff out there. So it makes sense. But for me, I think adoption isn't readiness isn't so much of the issue. It's more of building the infrastructure and the scale, and that kind of rests on leadership alignment in the beginning of the journey.
Mhm. And I think, Eric, I just thought of something is, when we talk about readiness right now, is back in the day, it used to be like, okay, are they ready? Here's your checklist, go, no go. But now it's not about, it's happening. And so it's not about whether you're ready or not, but it's let's get them as ready as possible and catch up if we need to.
Mm, good point.
I think one thing that I would add to the mix with regard to adoption, there's a lot of workplace anxiety, right? Even if someone uses it at home or they're learning about it in their off time, because organizations and leadership visions are still being determined, policies are still being determined, governance is still being determined, and much less infrastructure. There's a lot of unknowns there for the individual contributor or team. And so when it comes to adoption, I think it has less to do with the desire, right, in terms of to adopting, but it has probably more of really kind of what am I adopting? Because we're still kind of building, right? This is one of those classic we're building the plane as we're flying it. And I think we don't have a whole lot of answers. And I think that adds to really kind of the hairiness, right, of this type of adoption as opposed to a traditional technology adoption.
Yeah, that's a great point, Arlene. Kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to ask you all is about trust, right? Closely related to what you were just speaking about. So, trust has always been a major factor in large transformations. Do you think trust shows up any differently in an AI transformation? And if so, why?
Oh, I will take a swing at this one first. I think one of the things that I have always kind of kept in the back of my head that um, it's really really tough. I think sometimes to build a trust if you're implementing something, if there isn't necessarily trust to begin with, right? And so I think an AI environment probably feeds that a little bit more because of what we mentioned in terms of kind of things are still being determined and what have you. So as a practitioner, building any kind of messaging or goodwill while we're still trying to figure out it's difficult to really kind of put there's a whole chicken and egg situation there. And so when um when teams or stakeholders or users are skeptical to begin with, trust is really really difficult, I think, to really kind of um to gauge, much less in an environment that is constantly changing, right, every day.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's like your base, what's your baseline? What are you starting at from a trust perspective, regardless of AI? And then, I think, Eric, to answer your questions, for me, what really comes to mind is okay, there's the trust in the AI, the agent, the LLM, but we're not just asking people to trust the technology, we're asking them to rethink where they add value, right? And so it becomes this identity question. And do I, trust is not only is this tool going to work, but do I still matter? Like, where is my place? Do I trust the work I'm doing now is going to matter in the future? And so it's this multi-dimensional layer of trust, which is really, really interesting.
Absolutely, Kate. I think the idea of identity is completely different than what you would see in a traditional change environment. So, given that, what have you seen work in terms of building trust for an AI enabled environment?
Well, I think for me, in my experience, I've been doing a lot of micro adoption initiatives. So not necessarily in a space where we're building product, but we're really helping teams and users really kind of one understanding and the really kind of what AI means for their environment, and then tools that are being introduced into their workplace. And I think what I am realizing with regard to trust, um, it's not like past implementations or traditional implementations where if you're lagging behind a little bit in in say the layer of training, you ramp up your comms to kind of compensate for that. While you're really kind of coming up to speed so that everything is coming together. I find that in this particular environment, because there's such a dependency around really kind of everything happening at the same speed, being able to communicate, understand what needs to be learned, also really kind of understand any policies and policies or infrastructure impacts all at the same time, and then rinse and repeat very quickly
Mhm.
is something that, as a practitioner, really kind of having to run alongside that, and figure out one where it makes sense to really kind of share that information, or two, on the other side, be able to kind of advise a space where it's just like, hey, we're not quite ready. It's really putting my practitioner uh, chops to use. So
Yeah. Very interesting. What about you, Kate? Have you seen anything that works well in this environment?
Y Yeah, I think so what I've seen and, I've experienced firsthand that really works is giving people space and time to play with it and experiment, like low pressure environments of just go try, get weird with this, and because most people aren't going to learn how to use a certain agent or tool from a training deck. It's going to be by messing around with it and how it to work and incorporate it in their flow of work. So, I've even done things like, hey, hey team, book a room on a Friday afternoon. Hey team, I'm going to be in here from 2 to 3. Just building these agents, like come join me and let's solve this together. The second thing is really making it a part of the everyday conversation. So,
yeah,
sometimes, and I'm sure you guys can relate, is like you're moving so fast. There's so much to get done and so much to talk about, but creating the space to just talk about it. So, did anyone try AI this week? What worked? What didn't work? Even, talking about what's not working is really important. I think, I'll be the first to admit is I can build some pretty awesome stuff, but not all of it is as easy to build as people make it out to seem.
Yeah.
I've definitely, been, had some roadblocks at 1, 2 in the morning trying to figure something out that's not just, prompting my way through it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third thing is I think leaders really, we always talk about in the change landscape as enabling leaders and how critical leaders are, but it's like they're really critical for AI, l- not just like really walking the talk, and telling people how their teams how they're using it. And I think that takes a level of vulnerability that for the first times, leaders they aren't getting the 2 or 3 week heads up to cascade as they're learning alongside their teams in real time. And so that's also just a different leadership muscle than a lot are used to. And I think also that's really where trust starts to show up. Okay, my leader's telling me to use it and they're using it. So those are just, a few examples of really what I've seen move the needle.
Yeah. Awesome. It makes a lot of sense. Sense.
well, I'm gonna actually ask a question to the group. I know that in the spirit of McKinsey research, there's some literature out there that says that they estimate that generative AI could create 2 to 4 trillion in annual value. But I think the understanding is that many believe a significant portion of that value actually comes from the redesign of work, workflows, and operating models. Be curious to kind of get your take on what does true work redesign look like in the AI space, and how much of that redesign are you seeing kind of in practice in the
Mm.
spaces that you're working in?
Yeah. I'll start out with that one. So I think now people pretty much know what needs to be done when it comes to redesign and automation. You know, Doing your current state analysis, you want to keep your eyes open for what can be automated versus what should be augmented by AI. Where you can have human decisions versus where you have clear enough business rules so that you can have machines make the decisions. Um, where you have data that's ready, where you need to do to get your data ready. I think, people kind of know that. I do think though that um, people don't always think about where they have non-standard work. Can they identify what triggers that, right? Because if you can, then you can kind of automate that a little bit more too. So I think people get that. Um, what I have seen that's interesting is leaders and consultants sometimes disagreeing on where to start, right? Should you start to redesign at the task level? Should you start it at the, because AI changes tasks, or should you start at the workflow level so you can kind of get KPIs and metrics in place at a higher level? And Kate, I'm going to take kind of a play from your playbook and say it depends on the problem you're trying to solve, right? I mean, yeah, if you've got 80% of your cost in a handful of tasks, then sure, start at the task level. If the problem is customer experience and you've got delays between departments, then yeah, start at the workflow level. But I think what people are really concerned about is making the same mistakes that we made in the ERP days, where we automated and digitized work that really should not have been done at all, right? We were trying to digitize approvals and they ended up sitting in work queues. Right? And then people got comfortable with the dollar thresholds and we did away with half the approvals anyway. So I think that's what people are afraid of. What interests me more, that we've talked a little bit already about AI, it's constant change. So there's probably going to be constant change with workflows and all of that. I think it's interesting to think as OCM practitioners, how can we take those skills, those change skills that go along with continuous improvement process skills and operationalize those into the environment? Those are my thoughts.
I think those are really, really, I think those are really excellent observations. When I think about it, I mean, we are really kind of looking at environments that have to be redesigned on multiple levels, right? I mean, we're looking at individual jobs and really kind of team structures. We're looking at processes. We're looking at operating models because, we're in a place where AI is something that's going to happen throughout an organization, throughout a team and an enterprise, level, and not just, isolated functions where some of the traditional technology implementations that we've been working on, really kind of live and reside, right? We're not looking at just, one specific team that's impacted. We're looking across the board. And so, there's so many functions, there's so many teams that are interwoven that you can't look at anything in isolation. And by the way, it has to happen pretty swiftly and pretty quickly. And so when I think about redesign, it's really kind of looking at, look at all of these different layers that have to be looked at simultaneously, whether or not we actually, have the bandwidth to transform that immediately, right? That's always a struggle, but I think that's something that we are really kind of forced to think about and look at. And then the last thing, the other thing that I would say about about redesign before I give the floor to the two of you, I think there's I chuckle a little bit because in past implementations, we spend so much time documenting processes and workflows, right? I mean, we spend so much time, we build that into our scope of work where it's just like, oh, 6, 8 weeks of just documenting the current state so we can figure out what the future state is. Well, to your point in terms of, that everything is moving so fast, everything is obsolete by the time you do it. And then it's that much more, with AI because AI can actually do that for you in a matter of, minutes or hours, where once upon a time, it took an entire team of consultants or entire team of stakeholders to really go through that process. So I think it's really fascinating. I think, you know, the OD side of the people work, especially, will will have their hands full.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I everything you guys have said, and it's like there's so much to unpack. It's like what, so it just sparked so much, yeah, so many things top of mind. I think for me and with the OCM lens is it's really the crawl, walk, run, right, and just like where you are on the change curve, because in the beginning, and sorry, I have my dog that's probably going to come up here soon. Um, But,
Nice.
when you're in the beginning, you're just experimenting it. You're a lot, and a lot of what I'm seeing is overlaying AI onto existing processes because
Mm,
everyone's racing the clock, working backwards. And that's where people are on the change curve right now, right?
Mm.
But and I'm starting to see this more and more, is really looking at the entire workflows redesign. And I think back to, design thinking fundamentals and approaches is really turning how you work on its head, and where, like, how can you just redesign it entirely, or should you? And
mm,
so I'm seeing more of that. Um, but I think, yeah, I just keep coming back to, we're all experiencing this and going through this change, and where are we on the change curve, right? And so I think we're about to see a lot more of these workflow redesigns, and the ROI that I know, like, a lot of companies are talking about or not seeing yet.
hmm. Well, that'll be interesting. That'll be cool. All right, let's do another round of our initial thoughts. So again, I'm going to throw out a word. You guys going to go around, give me your initial thoughts, and then we'll unpack it. So, what are your first thoughts when I say training and learning in an AI enabled environment?
I when I think of training, it's just totally different. Is we're um as practitioners, we really need to build the muscle of, how, like, AI fundamentals and learning. It's less about training how to use the tool, because quite honestly, by the time you develop the training and roll it out, it's already changed. So it's, how do you train people and build that muscle to continue to go back and check? I remember the first time you guys we've used any of the tools, it probably wasn't so great. And then you go back, or you didn't go back and someone told you about it, and then you try it however much later, and it's like mind blowing, right? So building that muscle, and to continuously go back and check is, I think, really important. And I think just in general, it's completely changed the training landscape and how we think about training as change practitioners.
Very cool.
I think I'm going to piggyback on that thought because when I think about training in this environment, I think of it upside down, right? That's really kind of the phrase or the word that kind of pops into my
Yeah.
brain
Uh-huh.
because I feel like, to Kate's point, it's more about building a muscle. It has less to do with really kind of building training to push buttons, that we did in traditional technology implementations. It has more to do with really kind of how we're able to when I say we, I mean really kind of training and learning development practitioners, really how they're able to kind of rewire not only really kind of what teams and organizations use, but they also have to rewire the way that they approach building that, not only at speed, but really also kind of figure out how do they leverage existing AI tools to build AI knowledge and muscle, right? So there's a lot of flipping it upside down in terms of really kind of what, I say the luxury, but the runway that traditional implementations have, because, we've all been on engagements where it's just like, oh, the training team kind of comes towards the middle or the end or whatever, because they don't necessarily have to deliver, till a certain phase of work. And it's upside down here, right? You
Mm,
have to you have to be able to kind of help people move earlier, quickly, and more agile. And so
Hmm.
I really do think that, um, and I say this about OCL practitioners as well. I mean, I think that instead of being a sister service or a sister solution to, anything that's being implemented, I think that we're now coming into a space where we are more strategic, and training and knowledge, and learning development is more strategic. And I think the gift in that is bringing us in early as opposed to being the afterthought in the end. So
Hmm.
that's that's how I feel about it. So
cool. Both of those are
Yeah.
points. Yeah, go ahead, kid.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just picturing us all upside down, like spinning, our head spinning. But I think I completely agree with you, Arlene. And I've seen, ch changes everywhere. right? And, so is change fatigue. And so everyone needs to be like understand how to manage change. And so I think to your point is that's where our job is more on the strategic level is like, how do we equip the org to man to know how to manage change? And then I think just getting real tactical from a training perspective, a lot of what I've been doing or focus in some of my trainings is, less on the how to use it and a lot more in the like, here's where you use it in your workflow. Here's how to review it. Like, emphasizing you're the human in the loop. You can't just use these AI outputs. Like as they are, you need to review them, and then how to give it feedback, because that's part of trust too, is then feeds back to the product team, and the product team, incorporates it and then gets back to you to improve it. And so I think that's a lot of where I've been focused is like real high from building the muscle, and then very tactically is you need to review it, you need to give it feedback, and the importance of it.
Hmm, very cool. I was thinking my word was digital traces or digital exhaust. I kind of imagine like this machine and all of this exhaust coming out. And what I mean by that is, I think in another conversation, one of you had mentioned um, behavioral telemetry. And you think about all of the data that's available to us now that people are starting to use the Gen AI or any of the automation, it's just amazing, right? So between the large language models and using AI to really parse out what behaviors the top performers are doing, right? And being able to identify those behaviors, and then is it OCM's job to then scale that, right? So all of a sudden, we're not just training on whatever. Now we're training on, all right, people who are really producing well, this is how they're using AI. Now we can build a program to scale that. I just think that's really interesting. And to your points about being strategic, I think that could be a game changer. Yeah. Cool. The next question. So, middle managers, I know that it's always been a part of leading change. And as organizations move through AI transformations, what aspects of the middle manager role feel familiar from past transformations and what seems different?
Yeah. I am happy to go. I think, managers have always been this make it or break it layer. And so that part hasn't changed when we're talking about change. But I think in traditional change, they're often the messengers and they cascade, reinforce. But with AI, we're asking them to model it, and that's a lot harder asking. I touched on it earlier. And so we're not just asking managers to message the change, we're asking them to model it, we're asking them to use it. We're asking, like managers are being asked to do so much. And then, just being vulnerable and off, where are they really at with it? One thing that I've had a lot of conversations and I've seen, you know, be a huge just needle mover when it comes to AI fluency is managers literally creating the space for their teams to use and build with AI, reprioritizing things and, you know, tasking them and creating that space has been huge for teams that have had the opportunity. So I don't know if that gets at what you're asking, Eric, but I think they're
Yeah.
even just like they're even more critical in this space.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I mean, I've always in my career, for as long as I've been doing change, I think as any of us or whatever, I mean, I've always thought that managers were kind of the center of the universe of pretty much any transformation, any type of engagement, because they're tasked with managing up, they're tasked with managing down, they're tasked with
Mhm.
executing, and then oh, by the way, they're also the throat to choke when things go sideways, right? And so, I think to everything that Kate has described, with really kind of the importance of the manager layer, I'm going to also go back to our conversation on redesign, because I think we're in a space right now where you know managers now have to really kind of understand new roles that are being developed, right? I mean, before really kind of the boom of AI, you know, they were tasked with managing and orchestrating really kind of productivity and operations for teams that they probably already built their own set of skills and expertise, right? And now there are new job categories, there's new environments, there's new ways of governing things that not only are they having to do what is considered BAU for them, but they're also having to learn and they're also having to really kind of to really kind of feel comfortable with really kind of understanding how to navigate that while reporting any opportunities for improvement or any successes or failures so that the organization as a whole can move along. So I think it's I think more than now, more than ever, it shines a light and puts a microscope on really kind of how do we equip managers to really be successful at that while also supporting their own learning and their own change in this journey.
So you're saying the Starbucks cards aren't going to be enough anymore?
No, and pizza parties? No, no, probably not.
I want to go back to your point, Arlene, with managers and all that we're asking them to do. Change fatigue. What is different about change fatigue in an AI enabled environment? Or is it really just the same?
Well, I'm gonna take that one since I had a whole lot to say. And I think about, or I'm gonna start rather. So, um, I think that for me, change fatigue, I mean, there's a lot that's more of the same, but I think for me, as I think about AI and really kind of this environment that we're asking, practitioners to really kind of navigate, I think there's a lot more attention and a lot more opportunity to pay attention to the behavioral part of the anxiousness that teams and stakeholders and individual contributors are experiencing, because there's a lot of unknowns that are still being built. Moons ago in other environments, because it's either one, not necessarily what the client or the organization really want to pay attention to, looking at neuroscience or looking at really kind of some of the more behavioral factors of why there is any resistance or why there is there are hiccups in really kind of any implementation. You're able to kind of put that on a shelf and kind of go back to it because it's like, okay, well, we could pull on other things or whatever. But I think in this environment it's really difficult to not address that. And that, in the spirit of change fatigue, it adds a layer of fatigue that already exists. Um, that there's not a heat map in the world that's going to be able to identify and help move that. Whereas in traditional um, implementations, we had more luxury to really kind of turn a little bit of a blind eye to those factors.
Mm. Kate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think, and Arlene touched on this early in earlier conversations, but, change fatigue, it used to be with ERPs, okay, here's current state, future state, just get through this and it'll be good. And even in past transformations, there's always been some sort of finish line, but AI, we're building the plane as we're flying it. We don't know what the end looks like. And that's a level of anxiety, right? Not knowing. And then it's also exhausting as you have so much on your plate. It's constantly changing. You're constantly being asked to rethink where you're good at, where you add value, right? And so it's and I think that, just full circle is why change can't sit with just the change team anymore. Every team needs to really have that muscle of how to make sense of change and to focus on what matters and really operationalize it. And so because it's not, it's not going to slow down, right? And change fatigue is definitely there and you feel it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Absolutely. What do you all think about blind spots? So we know that every practitioner has blind spots. and those influence how we approach and how we manage change, right? So, in the world of AI, are there particular blind spots practitioners should be especially aware of? Either because AI introduces dynamics we may not immediately recognize, or because familiar assumptions no longer hold true.
S So, I'll go first. I don't know if this is exactly blind spots, but, just taking from lessons that I've learned is measurement. Usage dashboards, adoption feel good, but they don't really tell the full story. So really figuring it out up front of before you roll something out is how are you going to measure it? What do you want to measure? Do they trust it, use it? Are they getting better outcomes with it? Are they comfortable using it in front of a customer in their real workflow? And so measurement is huge in as much as we can figure out how you're going to measure it up front because, is it building it into the tool, your AI solution, is really important. And I can't tell you how many conversations or, meetings I've been in where we're talking about it after the fact.
Mhm.
And then really treating like we can't be treating AI like a technology rollout. It's a human change and there's so much to it. It's mindsets, behaviors, beliefs. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of companies are experiencing firsthand. And then the third for me is really, AI literacy, and particularly around AI ethics, bias, governance. Having those conversations earlier is really important. I think it's often an afterthought or a compliance checkbox at the end, but it has to be part of the change work in the beginning. And that's how you build trust. That's how you bring people along. And so I think that's been just a huge aha for me as I've been really getting into this work.
Hmm. It makes sense.
Those are really good because, um, because for me it's a yes and everything that you
Mhm.
said, and then I think for me the and would be, um, I think now more than ever, when I think about really this type of work, it has, it becomes really important to not focus on the adoption of something, and it has more to do with looking at the holistic transformation of the work, right? Because it goes back to what we talked about, redesign and trust and so many different things. And so even if you are implementing or streamlining a product or a tool or whatever, really having awareness of how it impacts the actual entirety of an ecosystem really makes it, more so than in projects past. This is transformational, not necessarily transformational to a function or a team, but it's transformational to an entire environment. So I think focusing on adoption versus the transformation as a practitioner is potentially a blind spot that that I constantly have to remind myself about. I think the other thing is, underestimating, right? This is similar to what Kate had said, but really kind of understanding the human factor, the human component there in terms of, there's real fear, there's real anxiety, there's real behaviors that, again, in traditional technology implementations, we're able to look at really how do we make sure that people understand enough to function in something that's live. But here we're asking, people to really kind of rewire the way that they do work, rewire the way they look at how they approach their day to day. And so, more than anything, I think it gives us license to really kind of lobby and really advocate for some of those factors that we didn't necessarily have the luxury in other types of engagements. And to be honest, and this goes back to the middle manager piece, because I am a huge fan of the the manager level, is that a potential blind spot for me, because I've always leaned on managers for being really kind of my hidden weapons, my secret stars in terms of moving things, moving the dial in any implementation or any adoption effort. A blind spot for me would put, is really kind of assuming that the managers are automatic change agents, that they're automatic super users, that they're folks that are already bought in and get it. And I don't think that's the case, because they've got their own change curve that we have to help them move, forward and kind of embrace. But we still don't know what that is, right? So I think that's a potential blind spot for myself and possibly other practitioners, where it's just like, hey, those rock stars that we leaned on in other types of implementation are probably more than anything the first. They're probably your pilot in terms of really kind of making sure that um, that we address their concerns, as opposed to automatically assume that you know, they're on board and they're ready to go. So blind
Mm,
spots. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, my first one is very similar to that, Arlene. For me, it's the subject matter experts that I would always go to, not necessarily managers, but just the people who were like, they've been there for years, they know it, just, they were always my crutch. And now with automation, like they're the ones that are like probably most afraid, right? Losing all that institutional knowledge and their value and their identity. Another one for me is the fact that you all said there's no finish line, right? It's different. OCM is about freezing, unfreezing, refreezing, but that's different. It's not going to get frozen again. So what do we do? So this has been really, really good. Is there anything you all want to say in closing? Any final thoughts?
Um, I think, to be honest, I think when I think about my own path forward, um, I also have to remind myself to gauge what my own appetite is for really kind of learning AI, right? Because I think it isn't like other spaces where you get up to speed very quickly on an ERP, Workday, SAP, whatever it is, and then you drop in and help implement that. This really is a litmus test in terms of, one, do I understand and embrace enough of AI to be able to really kind of move forward and build a strategy, build an approach, build, things that will tactically help move forward. And so I think that's the last thing I think maybe I would leave with this discussion, where it's just like it's a constant reminder to myself to also be continually learning, engaging really kind of what my own appetite is, because I think that also factors in kind of my um successes or opportunities as a practitioner moving forward.
Hmm. Okay. Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think super similarly, as I was just going to say, is there's so much out there and it's so easy to get overwhelmed and just analysis paralysis. Where do I start? Is I think the only way to really get through this is focus, like pick one tool and just go deep in it. You don't need to know all of them. But really just narrowing your focus can help um, not be as overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
What about
thank
you,
you.
Eric? You,
For me,
you don't get off scot free.
Yeah.
yeah, we're done. And yeah, for me, it's really about trying to figure out how we can use AI to do the things we always wanted to do, right? So I mentioned before, I think adoption is one side of the coin, but proficiency is another, right? How do we find those behaviors in the organization and scale them? Um, to your point about process work, it's not the same anymore. AI changes that. So I'm thinking about not just AI for changing in the organization's sake, but AI and changing our craft. So, all right. Well, thank you all so much. It has been so good seeing you.
I could yeah, I could talk about this all day and this is awesome. Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kate, great reconnecting with you by way of Eric. So look at us.